Good morning. How's everybody doing on this lovely winter day? We're delighted to have some wintry weather, but we just wish it would have been a little further out. I do want to take a moment to introduce myself. I am Richie Duncan, the Franklin County Economic Development Director, and I said I have the best job in the world because when I get up every morning, I'm not going to work. I am doing what I am passionate about and what all of us in economic development are passionate about. That is making our communities a better place for everyone. And in Franklin County, we are experiencing an unprecedented growth with 68,000 in our population currently. And just this past year, we added an additional 1,000 new homes. Now, what comes with that? That comes with a responsibility from our government to look after these people, and that means schools, roads, all the support services. I am very proud to say that in Franklin County, we have a committed group of citizens in the Franklin County Committee of 100 who invest money and time to see that we take care of our citizens. We have a very progressive, forward-thinking elected officials who support the economic development initiatives, and we have a wonderful county manager and staff which all work together to help Franklin County be the best that it can be. And we know at the core of that is education. So for the last 3 budgets, our county commissioners have fully funded the request that came to them from our school systems. We know if we're going to grow, we've got to have labor force ready for the jobs of the future. And you do that by starting with the education and funding it appropriately. And we work as a region. You heard them mention about Mariah Parham. Well, tonight at 4 o'clock, we're having a ribbon cutting on the brand new 20-bed facility, behavioral care facility at Mariah Parham Franklin. This is to serve this region. We also have 401, which is being 4-laned, and that is going to bring more people into this region and straight on up to Warren County. We say economic development is not something that happens in a silo with just one person or few people. No, economic development is truly a team sport. And I feel so fortunate to be on the wonderful team of the Kerr-Tar region, including Vance, Granville, Warren, and Person. All of my colleagues working together under the directorship of Diane Cox, whom I want to say thank you for helping us put this together. Now, I'm thrilled that I get to introduce our first speaker today. Many of you may be familiar with Dr. Michael Walden. He is a William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at North Carolina State University. He's also a member of the Graduate Economics faculty with the Poole College of Management. And his degree, his doctorate, is from Cornell University. He's been with North Carolina State since 1978. He's also been a visiting professor at Duke University. He has published over 12 books, over 300 articles, which I'm sure many of you have seen, and he has a new book included, which is North Carolina, Beyond the Connected Age, the Tar Heel State in 2050. You may have seen him before, you may have heard him on the radio before. He has a bi-weekly column entitled You Decide, which is carried in over 40 newspapers throughout the state. And he's done well over 3,000 personal presentations. So, Dr. Walden, we're making this 3,001. He has also won numerous academic and public awards, including 2 Champion Tuck Awards for Excellence in Broadcasting, the UNC Board of Governors Award for Excellence in Public Service, and many of you are familiar with the prestigious Order of the Longleaf Pine, and the Holiday Medal for Excellence from North Carolina State University. I'm going to give a plug for his newest book, which will be coming out 2020, Real Solutions, Common Sense Ideas for Solving Our Most Pressing Problems. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to bring forward Dr. Michael Walden.
Thank you very much. Who's ready for snow? It's everything in Raleigh is about snow, which leads me to a quick story. My wife is a retired public school teacher, 32 years. She's been retired a dozen years, and her passion is now gardening, flowers, bushes, not vegetables. So we have a third of an acre lot in Raleigh. Every square inch of that is manicured, ponds, bridges, a lot of that I've built. Anyway, Saturday she said, we got to get the gardens ready. I said, what do you mean? It's February. No, it's been a warm winter. We got to get the gardens ready. So she had delivered Saturday morning 100 bags of mulch and had them dumped in the driveway. Guess who moved them over the next 2 days? And one of the things she told me when I was moving them, she said, now watch out for the snakes. She said, snakes, of course, hibernate during the winter. It's been warm. They may be out there moving. So watch that you don't get bitten by a snake, which leads me to a quick story. There was a humorist in the early 20th century, W.C. Fields. Some of you may recognize the name. And one of the stories he related was that if you get a snake bite, he said, put a little dab of alcohol on it, maybe vodka, for example. And he said also take a little swig also, and that will inhibit the spread of any problems. And he said, therefore, if you are a gardener, you should do two things. You should carry a flask of alcohol with you, as well as a small snake. Well, my job is to give you a sense of where we are in the economy, national, state, as well as local. We have been enjoying some positive economic trends. For example, at the national level, we follow something called gross domestic product. You probably see that referred to frequently in news items. It's been growing. We've been increasing. If you see this number go down, and it goes down for 2 consecutive quarters, that's a recession. But it has been growing. There's been a little bit of debate recently, as you may have seen, between the current president and the former president about who's responsible for this growth, and I'll let that lie. But we've actually had positive economic growth in our country now going on for 11 years. It's been 11 years since the Great Recession started. And that is actually a record. So we are in record territory for sustained economic growth. Now that's led a lot of people, I get a lot of questions, people say, well, Dr. Walden, doesn't that mean we got to have a recession soon? No, recessions aren't on any time schedule. And indeed, Australia, which has been in the news recently, not for a good thing because of the fires there, Australia's actually not had a recession in 20 years. So as you'll see when I get to my forecast, I think this can continue. Now, we have seen the unemployment rate drop tremendously. It was in double digits at the height of the recession. It's now down to around 4%. We've seen incomes adjusted for inflation rise. Now, this is average, not everyone, but incomes adjusted for inflation on average have risen. And we've had also some interesting positives in the labor market. Part-time work is down. There are more people working full-time. Now, that's not to denigrate part-time work. For a lot of people, part-time work is exactly what we need, or what they need, but what we worry about are people who are working part-time because they can't find full-time work. That's the number that's gotten better. We've also seen low-wage workers receive the highest pay boost, wage rate gains of any category, and many people think that that's actually been part of the reason why the economic recovery has been sustained, because let's face it, moderate, low-income folks, because of their necessities, tend to spend most of that. It's obviously spending that keeps the economy going. Higher-income folks save a lot more of their money. When you save money, that's productive, but it can mean that you're not getting that money back into the economy as quickly as you would want. And then the worker share of the total economic pie has gone up. So some positives there. In terms of the Federal Reserve, you should always watch what the Federal Reserve is doing. If you see a headline on whatever medium you use to get the news, newspaper, computer, whatever, if you see a headline about the Federal Reserve, read that, because they control a lot of what happens in the economy through their impact on interest rates in the financial sector. The Federal Reserve actually changed course in 2019. Very, very unusual for them to do this. They had been raising interest rates from 2014 up through 2019, which is standard operating procedure for them. When the economy is growing and improving, Federal Reserve tends to nudge interest rates up. The philosophy there is they want to sort of moderate things, keep the economy growing but not getting out of hand. That could set us up for a fall, or it could cause inflation to go up further. So they were following standard operating procedure. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, they were getting a lot of pushback from politicians. Someone who tweets a lot, I won't mention names, someone who tweets a lot was pushing back. People in the private sector were pushing back. Even some economists were saying, Federal Reserve, why are you doing this? We're not growing that fast, number one. And number two, there are no signs of inflation heating up. Inflation's running between 2% and 3%. So to their credit, the Federal Reserve sort of issued a mea culpa and said, you know what, we probably were overreacting, and so we're going to change course. And last year, if you look at the far right-hand side of this graph, last year the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates by 0.75 percentage point. Now they have said they've stopped lowering them, they're going to keep them there. But that's been very, very helpful for people who are borrowing money, whether you're buying a house, whether you're starting a business, et cetera. Interest rates are very, very affordable right now. If we look at the trade wars, so-called, or trade disputes, we've had some good news on that in recent months. First of all, we now have a successor to NAFTA. I was here during the NAFTA debate in the mid-90s. This was a very, very controversial issue in North Carolina because a lot of North Carolinians were worried that with trade barriers between Mexico and the U.S., especially down, that would cause some of our textile and apparel industry in particular to migrate south. You know, they were actually right. That is what happened in many cases. So there was a move, particularly in the new administration, the Trump administration, to look at some of the trade deals that the United States had entered into in the last 20 years and see if they could, 20 or 40 years, and see if they could be adjusted to, quite frankly, be more favorable to the U.S. And so NAFTA came up for a renegotiation. Actually, it went very smoothly, relatively smoothly. We now have a new agreement. It's not called NAFTA anymore. It's called the USMCA, U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Couple key things in there that I think are very, very important for North Carolina. First of all, it will help our farmers because we have had access to Mexican markets. Secondly, it will help some of our key industries, technology, but also auto parts. A lot of people don't realize North Carolina is a big auto parts producer. It will help that because there's a new requirement in this agreement to have more of the parts that go into vehicles assembled in North America come from North America. So it will help that. And then lastly, North Carolina, as you probably know, has been trying for, 40 years almost, to land an auto assembly plant. Now, that's considered a big prize, and the overwhelming reason is if you get an auto assembly plant, that's transformative because you're talking about multiple thousands of jobs when you consider not only the people working in the plant, but the supply chain. We are, I think, other than Florida, we are the only state in the Southeast that does not have an auto assembly plant. Well, one of the provisions of the USMCA requires Mexico to increase by a very high percentage, something like 20-25%, increase the wages of a large segment of their auto workers. So what that means is Mexico will still have an advantage in terms of cost of an auto assembly plant locating there, but it won't be as big as it used to be. So I'm optimistic that this is going to make North Carolina look better for a future auto assembly plant, and so that's another positive that may come out of this. Now, China, our trade dispute with China has been really hanging over the economy for several years. Very quickly, we sell about $100 billion of products and services to China, but they sell $500 billion to us. So we run a big trade deficit with China. Many economists aren't worried about that, but some are. Secondly, people say that China doesn't play fair. They subsidize their companies that are competing with our companies. They have some rules. If you are setting up a U.S. factory in China, you have to, in essence, turn over a lot of your internal production secrets. And then China uses some tactics to make it harder for our companies to sell there. So this has been, our dispute with China has been going on really since we started major trading with China in 2000. And previous administrations have taken the legal route and said, all right, China, we're going to take our complaints to the World Trade Organization court. There's actually a court. And China, in many cases, has been found guilty, but they've not done anything. So the Trump administration, rightly or wrongly, I'll let you decide, said, you know, we're going to try a different tactic. We're going to try to make life difficult for China. We're going to hit them in the pocketbook and see if we can't convince them to change some of their ways. And so what we've done, what the U.S. did, was levy tariffs, which is just a tax on Chinese exports to the U.S., thereby making those exports more expensive here. Now, China didn't take this line down. They turned around and said, well, if you're going to put tariffs on our exports, we're going to put tariffs on what you sell to us. So that's what we call a trade war. And that went on for at least a couple of years. And last December, mid-December, we had, at that point, had tariffs on about 2/3 of Chinese products sold here. In mid-December, it was set to go to almost 100% of Chinese products. And clearly, they would have retaliated. Don't know if that was the final straw that caused the two parties to agree, but we had an agreement in mid-December called a Phase 1 agreement simply because it doesn't address all the outstanding issues. But it is going to result in some reduction, not all, but reduction in some tariffs on both sides, as well as China is promising to buy large additional quantities of U.S. manufactured products as well as farm products. And our farmers have really been hit by this. So that's a positive. And I think that has led many of us to think that the economy will continue to grow. Now let me real quickly look at what is lurking out there or could be lurking out there that may cause my relatively optimistic outlook to change. And I'm going to fast forward through a number of slides here if I can, and get to, oh, I'm sorry. All right, let me linger on this one. One of the big, if any of you, maybe some of you are seeking to get a degree in economics, I applaud you for that, or if you have children or grandchildren who are doing that, if you go through any standard economics program at a university, one of the big questions, particularly in what's called macroeconomics, is what causes recessions? Why can't we continue to grow year after year after year? What causes recession? And by recessions, I mean economy-wide downturns. Clearly, not every household, not every business, not every region is going to grow at the same pace. But when economists talk about a recession, we're talking about everyone pretty much in the economy feeling the effects. And this has been a puzzle that economists for decades have looked at. The former chair of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, that was his focus in his dissertation at MIT, for example, and he's considered one of the key experts on that. One of the things, not the only thing, but one of the factors that can lead to a recession is simply that people get overwhelmed with debt. People take on too much debt. They then get to a point where they find that they have to cut back on their spending in order to meet those debt payments, or they go bankrupt. And so one of the factors that economists track to get a sense of where the economy is going is debt loads. The good news here, and I'm looking at household debt, is if you look at the current level of household debt, and importantly, you measure it not by how much debt people have, but you measure it by how much carrying that debt takes from the average household's disposable income, okay? So for example, what if you earn $5,000 a month? Wish I did. What if you earn $5,000 a month and you've got $3,000 of that committed to paying debt? That doesn't leave you much left to pay on other things. So that's what we're measuring here, the percentage of the average household's disposable income, that's after taxes, that is committed to paying debt. And look where we are. We are at a historic low here. This is where we were before the Great Recession. Look at where we are now. So although you read about households taking on more debt, households are able to cover that by their incomes going up as well as interest rates either going down like they did last year or staying low. And I don't have time to go through other slides. It's pretty much the same for businesses, even for the federal government. The federal government, of course, you've read, taking on more and more debt, but still, because interest rates are so low, they can afford to do that. I'm not condoning that, but they can afford to work that into the budget. So right now, we don't see any issues related to household or government or business debt that would lead us to causing any of those entities to pull back. Now, one question I've gotten recently, and it's a new one, is the coronavirus. Some people worried, and naturally, could this lead to not just a recession in China, but a worldwide downturn? Could this lead to a worldwide recession or depression? And I get that because viruses are scary things. I mean, a lot of movies and books have been written about fantasy, or not fantasies, thrillers, if you will, about viruses hitting Earth, and you got some heroes who eventually handle it. We can't see viruses, so it's not something you can naturally avoid. So it's a very scary thing. But what I think what the conventional wisdom is right now is that this is containable. I think we've had about 2,000 deaths internationally from the coronavirus. We went through a similar outbreak for something called SARS. Some of you may or may not remember. In 2003, I think we had about 1,500 deaths. But these pale in comparison to what my grandparents lived through in 1918 and 1919, what was called the Spanish flu, which killed 50 million, between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. So we think this is containable. Yes, if you're a business and you're getting products shipped in from China, there may be some interruptions there. China may not start buying all those new farm products that they promised to until they get this situated. What I tell people to do is watch the trend in new cases and new deaths. If they start to go down, that is a sign that this is going to be contained. So let me move on here. My forecasts is that the economy will continue to grow 2 to 2.5%. We're going to have job growth. I don't think you're going to see a lot of the unemployment rate go down much more because we're already low. And fortunately, you might be saying, well, how are we filling those new jobs if pretty much everyone who wants a job has a job? We're filling them by doing something very, very good, and that is getting people who have dropped out of the labor force, bringing them back in. And very importantly, there are some encouraging signs in some areas where individuals of working age who have problems, for example, addictions, opioid addiction, are beginning to get help, get trained, and get into the workforce. So I think that's a positive that comes from continued economic growth. I think the Federal Reserve will hold interest rates steady. Inflation may bubble up a little bit, but I think stay under 13%. Remember, in the late 70s and early 80s, inflation was in double digits, 13, 14%. Stock market, I don't try to predict the stock market. I've just thrown some numbers up there just so you think I'm smart. It could go down by 10%, maybe it could go up by 5%. I have no clue. I mean, really, seriously, the stock market is extremely difficult to predict because a lot of it depends on psychology, because what stock investors are doing are trying to look out to the future. And they're trying to predict what happens in the future. And there are a lot of things that obviously could affect that. All right, let me turn to North Carolina, and then I will stop with talking about the Kerr-Tar area. North Carolina has had a growing economy, but not every sector has participated, unfortunately. The red bars here, you may not be able to read the captions. Manufacturing and agriculture have actually been hit fairly hard in the last couple of years, and the reason for that is again this trade dispute. That's one of the reasons why we really wanted to have some settlement with China. But if you're in the tech sector, if you're in the professional sector, if you're even in construction, you can see those are sectors where the bars are positive. We have had growth. Now, one of the issues in this area, if I can leap forward, is you have a heavier presence in manufacturing in the Kerr-Tar region. And so if manufacturing has been facing challenges, that's some of the reason why you may have seen some challenges here. If you look at job growth, we continue to blow away the nation. We're in red, the nation is in blue. Last year, 2019, yeah, remember the year, Walden. We added almost 100,000 jobs in North Carolina. almost double what we added in 2018. On a percentage basis, we grew at about 2%. The nation grew at about 1.4%. A big reason for this is people love coming to North Carolina. I'm an immigrant from Ohio originally. My wife is from upstate New York. People love coming to North Carolina. And we're beginning to get the numbers for 2019 on something called net in-migration. What that does is track people moving from other states. This is not international immigration. What that number tracks is people moving from other states to North Carolina over and above the number of people moving out of North Carolina. We have been positive on that for as long as I can remember. And the preliminary numbers we have for 2019 show we were the 9th top state in net in-migration. Only South Carolina in the southeast beat us, and they just beat us by a smidge. So people love coming here, and that's been a fuel for our economic growth. All right, let me conclude, if my clicker can work, by talking about your region. In 2019, your jobless rate, this is all the counties in your region, by the way, reached 3.8%, right there with the nation and the state. You had a 2.3% job growth rate. That's actually better than the state, far better than the nation, which was 1.4. The state was 2. You were 2.3. So you should applaud yourselves, pat yourselves on the back for that. You had greater job growth. Now, as I said, if you look at your economic structure, one of your challenges is that you have a heavier presence in manufacturing. And I'm not denigrating manufacturing at all, but manufacturing is faces challenges, international challenges in terms of workforce. Manufacturers now have the ability to use more technology, use more machinery, cut back on labor. It's a very, very competitive industry, so there are challenges there. I'm certainly not saying move away from manufacturing, but it is an industry that does face more challenges than many other industries. You also have a heavier presence in healthcare. If you, what am I saying here? If you look at where you were pre-recession by something called GDP, gross domestic product, aggregate output, you're still a little off from that. You're still a little bit down. You are recovering, but you're still a little bit down. And in most counties, as I said, manufacturing has been downsizing, while sectors like finance, professional services, and information are upsizing. In terms of where I think you can go, I think some strategies are, and I'm sure your economic development people here are great and know this much more intimately than I do, but looking at my perspective, say at the 10,000-foot level looking down, one thing that you have an advantage of is your location. You're not that far from the triangle. And the triangle is, I saw a statistic the other day that showed that if you look at population growth from 2010 to 2018, the triangle was the second fastest growing metro area in the country. We were only beat by Austin. So the triangle is growing. It's going to continue to grow. Wake County, for example, where I live, is expected to add 200,000 people in this decade. And you're right north, you're about an hour north of the triangle. So one of the things I think that you can clearly sell to businesses to try to attract them here is say, we're not that far from the triangle, yet our cost of living is lower, our land costs are lower, et cetera. So you can operate here, you can still access that big market, and yet you can hopefully increase your profit rate. I would encourage you to try to blend your traditional industries, manufacturing, farming, with new industries like based around tourism, retirement, technology. You're obviously not that far from you actually include great areas where people want to visit, maybe retire to, and that's going to be a big mover and shaker in the next 30, 40 years. My generation, the baby boomers, retiring, a lot of them in the Northeast, Midwest, moving south. That's economic development. If you can attract people to come here and retire and bring their Social Security check, bring their pension, buy a house, spend that money here, that is economic development. That is bringing in new money. So I think you are well positioned to do that. You might say, well, and you're fixated on this, but it's a big deal. If North Carolina does land an auto assembly plant, it could go in your region. somewhere, primarily your eastern part of your region, again, that would be transformative. So obviously follow what's happening there on the state level. And the last thing I want to do, and it ties off of my last comment there, and then I'll stop. Transportation is a part of our economy that affects everyone. Every single person. Even if you don't drive anywhere, you stay in your house, you're affected by transportation because you're buying products and services that use transportation. And one of the issues that every state faces is how are they going to finance transportation in the future? The gas tax is dropping because people are moving away from internal combustion automobiles and vehicles. There are some forecasts that by 2050, everyone will be driving, say, an electric vehicle or a natural gas vehicle or something. Those are forecasts, but I think the trend is in that direction. Also, young people are not buying vehicles like older generations did, and we get transportation tax revenue from vehicle purchases. So one of the issues as we look out in the future is how are we going to fund transportation infrastructure? In North Carolina, that's primarily a state function. So there is a new commission, well, it's been in existence a year, called NC First, Future Investment Resources for Sustainable Transportation. I'm on that commission. There are 12 of us. We've been meeting a year. We're going to meet another year. And our charge given to us by Secretary Trogdon is to look at two issues. One, how's North Carolina going to get transportation revenues in the future? Do we need to change how we get that? And number two, once we settle on how we're going to get transportation revenues, how are we going to spend those revenues? Do we need to build roads at the same pace we are doing now? Some say, for example, that if we move to autonomous vehicles, those are more efficient users of road pavement, we won't need as many roads. Some say that the future in transportation is not to have people own vehicles, but everyone to use ride sharing. When you need a vehicle, you touch an app and an autonomous vehicle appears at your door and you go do whatever you do and you come back and it goes away. And if that happened, we probably wouldn't need as much road. So anyway, there's an issue there about what is the mix? Roads, mass transit. Also, we're going to look at ports, airports, seaports, et cetera, in this. So we're supposed to have our recommendations done by this time next year. We have no power, obviously, to implement them, but this is something for you to watch. You can go online, just Google on NC First, search on NC First. You can look at all the materials that we're looking at. I do think this is a very, very important commission. So let me stop, and I think we're set up for questions, and maybe I could take 2 or 3 questions and allow other people, the other speakers to follow. And unfortunately, I've got to get back to Raleigh for another presentation at 11:45. So any questions out there? Yes. No. My forecast is, I had on the slide there, I think we're going to continue to grow somewhere between 2 and 2.5%. So if I'm given a binary choice, recession, no recession, I'll take no recession. If I'm given a percentage choice, I'll say 20% chance of a recession this year. Any other questions? Notice who won that basketball game last night, too. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm going into the closet.
There you go. Thank you so much. All right, let's hear it for Dr. Walden. I think we've all heard him speak a number of times, but one thing I really love about his presentations is he keeps it current and he brings it down to our particular region and what is happening. So really appreciate him being here. The next thing that we're going to go to is we're going to go to a panel discussion, and we're going to try some new technology with this. So let's hope this works. If you have a phone or if you have your computer with you, you can go to slido.com, that's SLIDEO.com, and enter event code R, like Richie, how's that? 463, event code R463. Now what you will be able to do is to ask us questions in real time. and I'll have an iPad there. The questions should be coming up on the iPad, and we're going to try to answer as many of those questions as possible. So that'll be a new treat to try here, and we hope that'll work out. And the code is R463. Did it enter? Is it written anywhere? I don't see it written anywhere. I don't think they have it on a slide. Did it work? Okay, great. All right, I heard a yes. All right, we have two wonderful panelists to come up, and there you go. All right, thank you, Michael. I'll give you a few moments to try it and make sure you can get on. Everybody got it now? Okay. Well, let me first introduce our first panelist, Jennifer Lance. Jennifer Lance is the Economic Director for the Wilson Economic Development Council. And she actually began her career as the Corporate Secretary with Wilson County Properties in 1989. Since then, Jennifer, in her position, has been responsible for development of 3,000 plus new industrial jobs. She's attracted $2 billion new dollars in investment, and yes, that's B with a billion, and she has provided for Wilson County for every dollar that has been received in funding, they have had a return of $1.80. That's a pretty darn good record. She's also responsible for 2 new corporate parks and 2 existing industrial parks. She serves on the North Carolina Economic Development Board, and she is also a member of the North Carolina Economic Developers Association. In Wilson County, she has served on the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and is also a member of the First Presbyterian Church and is an elder with that church. She is a member also of the Research Triangle Regional Partnership Board of Directors from 2015 to present, a member of the Rotary Foundation of Rotary International, and there she received the Paul Harris Fellow. She also received from the Industrial Asset Management Council the Mary Jo Hanover Award. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Lance. And one moment, we have a technical question. Oh. Okay, can everybody hear me? Is this, no, mic's not up. I just heard it, there we go. All right, we're trying something new with the microphones too. So all of this is fun new technology. And I do want to recognize our second person who will be joining us, Hillary Sherman. If you'll please come on up to the stage. Thank you. And Hillary Sherman is a longtime friend of this region and has done a number of projects in this region. She is with the North Carolina Economic Development Administration, and she is our North Carolina representative. And I've got to say, this lady is a dynamo. Her territory is all of North Carolina, and she is on the road back and forth while still raising a family. So thank you for everything you do, Hillary. She works with communities to develop and implement economic development projects. And prior to this role, Hillary served as the lead for the Performance and National Programs Office for EDA in Washington, D.C. And there she was focused on performance, asset, and program management. Hillary holds a BS in Biology and English from Elon University, And this is something I learned. You have a master's in law from the National University of Ireland. So welcome to both of these young ladies for our panel. All right. Okay, Jennifer, we're going to start with you. And Jennifer, when you want to know what to do with a community, how do you get started with economic development? How do you get an industrial park assembled? And better yet, how do you get buildings and product in those parks? Jennifer is our go-to lady. She was kind enough to take Franklin County on a tour and explain to us some of the basics. And so we want to give her the opportunity to share her insight with you. And let's see if we can get this up here. There you go. There's your shell building. Okay?
In economic development, if you don't have product, you aren't going to sell anything. So if you don't have industrial parks, if you don't have buildings, if you don't have private developers delivering them, then you have to do it publicly. Because you cannot sell a house as a real estate agent if there's nothing to sell. So for all of the communities here, you have to have the appropriate product.
And how would you recommend getting the community together to do that product?
I think you have to understand your economy. I think you have to gather community leaders. I will tell you that every time we look at a new product, we gather somewhere between 100 and 400 Wilson citizens and talk to them about what we're thinking and why we're thinking and what they think and what we all think will work. So you have to build consensus for the idea, and then we take that consensus from our citizens and our business to our city and county. And our city and county fund things jointly. So my shell building is funded equally by the city of Wilson and Wilson County. And the city and county own land that I am their agent, and I develop the land and work out the deals and sell the land for them. And then we also have Wilson County Properties, which is a private, nonprofit development corporation that also has land, and we sell land from there.
All right, that's great. Now, a question came in, and I'm going to ask this, okay? You have a community, you have an industrial park, and we know that some of our industrial parks are not fully developed. They may be beautiful wooded lots today. How do you go about changing an industrial park from a beautiful set of woods to an industrial park?
Well, if it's land that really hasn't been developed, and it's, you know, what was a patch of woods, then you have to put in the infrastructure that's going to attract industry. The theory that you can wait for an industry to come and then promise to build it is fine as long as every other community across the U.S. is doing that. But the rest of us are not doing that. So if you don't put in your infrastructure, and Hillary is a great partner in that, then you're not going to have an industrial park. So for me, in order to consider it an industrial park, there are several things I do. The first thing is I secure the land. Once I secure the land, I rezone it. If it's something that is in Vance County, but I also want it to be in the city of Henderson, I annex it. And then I work on the infrastructure. At a minimum, I bring water, sewer, natural gas, electric, and fiber to all of my sites. And this is where Hillary should chime in.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because this is a perfect lead-in for Hillary. And we're talking about all this infrastructure, and you did hear broadband mentioned, and I think all of us will agree that that is a critical piece of infrastructure now. But if you need funding, Hillary, I'm going to look in your direction.
The best economic developers are going to be those who are able to tell the story in a way that's going to resonate with multiple funders. Because at the end of the day, there is no single funder out there that is unfortunately going to cover all the needs of that. Sorry, going back.
Cool stuff we're doing here.
And
Just down a
so
little bit.
in North Carolina, you have federal funds, you have state funds. There are a range of foundation partners. There are groups like the Committee of 100 and Rotary that often engage in projects. There's county and local funds. And so as economic developers, as local leaders, when you're looking at financing a project, it is critical to think about the myriad of resources out there and what the cost and benefits are to each of those. I think sometimes when people are searching for funds, the easy thing to do is kind of go after them. There's a cost to applying for a number of funds. And the cost is the time associated with reviews, it's the cost for the application, it's the cost for doing some of the grant administration, and there's different level of burdens depending on what you pursue. One of the things I think that's so important to EDA is, in the partnership we have with the Kerr-Tar Council of Governments, is we try to work really closely with communities in understanding what your vision is to help you understand what may be the most appropriate resource. Because at the end of the day, EDA is one funder of that. But I think as you're looking at financing, there's 4 questions you have to ask yourself. What is your goal? Who's going to own that asset? What are you trying to do? What is your timeline? And what is your outcome, and how much is it going to cost? Because the answer to those questions are going to dictate who your appropriate funder is. I would encourage you, as you're thinking about financing, whether it's from EDA, USDA, Golden Leaf, Commerce, DEQ, any number of funders, to really think about what else is going on in your region. The agency I work with, we just released a funding application for disaster supplemental for communities adversely impacted by Hurricane Florence and Michael. And I was sharing with an old friend that we in the Atlanta Regional Office are oversubscribed 5-to-1 on what we have available. And so those communities that can come in and say, this is what my project vision is, this is how this project is going to help us move forward from an economic development perspective, and have clarity in their ability to do that, are ultimately the ones that are going to be most successful in doing that. Those that come in where the idea is not crystallized, where the costs are not clear, or where the benefit is unknown, do not represent a strategic investment for many funders, including ours.
That's a great answer. And I will tell you that we were fortunate in Franklin County to have an example of funding by EDA when we put in our access road from US 401 through the Triangle North Franklin Park, and it opened up access not only to that park, but also to our airport. But to do that, I can tell you there were many, many meetings, a lot of paperwork, a lot of crunching of numbers, and Hillary did a great job in guiding us, but you are correct. You've got to have community buy-in, and you need to know your numbers. A question came in while you were talking, and I'll let both of you take this one, is they said, if you have an industrial park, and most of us do have industrial parks, how do you distinguish your industrial park from others in this very highly competitive environment?
Jennifer, you want to have the first one?
You should know your assets, and you should know how to present them. And you should know whether the industrial park you have right now is actually the industrial park that's going to be transformative for your community. So when I moved to Wilson in 1989, Wilson had a small industrial park, Hackney Industrial Park, with some great businesses in it. And on day 2, I started working on the new industrial park. Now, my board wasn't with me on the new industrial park yet, and it took me about 2 years to get my board, the community, and the city and county on board with me. But I got them there, and the new industrial park is actually adjacent to I-95, whereas the Hackney Industrial Park is about a mile from US 301. So I think the first thing you have to do, if you're taking a hard look at yourself right now and looking at your economic development policy and your mission and your guidelines and what your guiding principle is and where you want to be 5 years from now, is look at your product and see, is it the right product? Is it in the right place? Is it attractive to companies coming in? And what can I do to make it more attractive? For me, I go into wooded lots. We talked about a wooded park. I go into wooded lots and I judiciously cut trees, and then I spray the underbrush. So as you walk through or drive through my park, a lot of the lots look like you're walking through this pastoral woodland, but you can see the lay of the land. And it looks like someplace you would really like to stroll or maybe build a factory and still leave some trees. So there are all kinds of little tricks you can do, but the key to it all, to me, is knowing your community and knowing what your best assets are.
Yeah, I would just echo that data matters. And in economic development, we see in a lot of applications where communities are trying to copy somebody else. To build assets that aren't necessarily built on what the workforce or foundational asset that individual community is. And that can be done, but it's often a long-term proposition, and there has to be lots of incremental steps to get there. So I think it's really important to think about, looking at the data, looking at what your primary occupational clusters are, what your primary industry clusters are. What are the secondary and tertiary supply chains of that? Where are those located? And what makes sense in terms of cultivating what your gaps are in a holistic manner?
I think you both answered it very well. And another question came up, and this was regarding, I'm going to direct this one to you, Hillary. There are many different funding projects that you listed. Someone asked about planning. Do you have funding for a community that wants to do something? They've got the citizens engaged, but they don't know how to plan it. Do you have funding for that?
Yeah, and I think the question becomes the planning for what? EDA, like many funding partners, we try to work really closely with other funders and resources in the state. So if you need general strategic planning or general economic development planning, the Regional Council of Governments can be a resource, as can I saw Bruce with NC Commerce, who's the regional rep here, who's a great resource there. And I know that he's done some work in town of Biscoe and in Columbus County that has been really useful for making very concrete actions. EDA has funded projects, for example, town of Haw River, where the city had a question. How do we look at, they had some vacant industrial old textile buildings, and the town wanted to see, should they invest $1 million in repurposing this to help attract a brewery into the town? And they were looking at using taxpayer money to do that, but they didn't know if it was going to be viable or not. So they came to EDA to say, hey, can you help us do this analysis? And it was $20,000 matched by $20,000. And we did some transportation analysis and some analysis of the industry and found that that location was never going to work in terms of what that potential site was, and help them redirect those assets to a more appropriate location. They had time on their side, so that was an appropriate thing, and it was a reasonable cost. So the project can be right, EDA can be a resource for that. Generally, our range for technical assistance is going to be $20,000 to $100,000, depending on the scale. EDA also works with a number of partners, and one of them is the Keenan Center for Private Enterprise at Chapel Hill. Sorry, the state fans. But we have a partnership with there where we can send master's level students out into communities to tackle specific projects. So if a community can define a specific economic development question that is clearly defined, I'm happy to kind of go back and explore to see if there's a student that has capacity and expertise that we can put there at no cost to you. So there's a lot of ways to tackle that, and happy to have a conversation with you. And again, I know Bruce is here, I saw him earlier. EDP is here, who's a great consult as well. Mm-hmm. I saw Harry, and he's a great resource in terms of connecting to understand how other commerce programs may be able to be leveraged. I think take advantage of the myriad of resources available.
Great. Jennifer, would you like to add anything?
I think Hillary covered it.
All right, terrific. All right, we're just about out of time, but I'm going to ask the last question of each of you is if you could tell a community the top 2 things that they should do for economic development, what do you think it would be?
You go first.
So I see a lot of communities that are doing either or, that are focusing on site development, or they're focusing on industrial park development, or are trying to answer a specific question. Good economic developers and communities that are really seeing a lot of success right now, what we are seeing as an agency is that they're taking an all of the above approach. And they're doing it in a way that's very collaborative, not only within that local jurisdiction, but within the region as a whole. So I think that the more that communities can be open and honest about their needs, have engaging conversations where your folks who are doing your water and sewer infrastructure are engaged in talking to your economic developers, understand capacity needs, understand the functional loads that can be carried and what that looks like, understand housing issues, because it's all interrelated. That has to be handled and administered in a comprehensive way, and that affects and impacts how you pursue funding, and the order and the story that gets told. So I guess I would just encourage and put a plug in for that local and regional coordination and collaboration, and for it to be more than just a single project, for you guys to look comprehensively, and for that to include not only construction, but non-construction. One of, I think, the most impactful projects the EDA has invested in recently is actually a non-construction project. And it's called it's in conjunction with the Manufacturing Solutions Center, but it's the Carolina Textile District. And the reason it's been so impactful is because it's covered a fairly large area in the Piedmont that was really decimated as we all witnessed textiles kind of left. And there was a lot of communities that were struggling with textiles that had been able to kind of limp along and stay open, but had reduced worker hours, had reduced product lines, and were really basically making it week to week in terms of keeping those folks on payroll. A group of folks who were committed leaders in Burke and Catawba and other communities saw that there was a growing interest in textiles from entrepreneurs and folks who were needing a way to kind of get in the market. And they figured out a way to kind of leverage face-to-face and technology to create an interface, essentially, to map a latent capacity at textile firms with the needs of emerging entrepreneurs, and create platforms for those who are trying to get into the market to connect and go there. So now you have former sock manufacturers doing baby lines runs, and you're creating, it's really incredible what's being done, and it's making a difference. Anyway.
That's great. Jennifer?
I would take a completely different approach and a non-analytical approach. I would take 20 community leaders who cover a broad array of my community, age, ethnically, from a financial standpoint, just a good mix of people, and I would take them on the road. And what I would take them to see are maybe 5 communities who are doing things right. And then I would bring them back, and I would convene a group like this, but at tables. And I would have my 100 to 200 people and those 20 who have seen it sit down together and talk. And I would determine what it was I wanted my community to be in 5 years, 10 years. And I would not look at the data that would tell me we couldn't be those things, because if I had done that in 1989, then Wilson wouldn't have a large biopharma presence. We'd still be tobacco and textiles, and we'd be in decline. So I really wouldn't look at the data at this point. I would just look to everyone's ideas and imaginations. Now, if someone suggests that Henderson needs to be the next Hollywood, I would sort of put the brakes on that. But I would get everybody to collaborate and come up with the vision first. Because once you know what you want to be, and you don't have to be what you are now, once you know what you want to be, it's pretty easy to put together a roadmap to get there.
Wonderful. I want to thank both of these ladies. You can see why we had them on the panel, and I thank you both for your time.